Nedarim Daf Mem Ches begins in the middle of a Mishnah and contains one additional Mishnah. The Mishnah we've already seen, which discusses what happens when there is property that is shared. It belongs to all the citizens of a city or of a country, and one of the people has Nisr on another. What do they do with that? And then the next Mishnah will discuss how can you transfer property to someone who is also to have enough from you by giving it to a third person in between. The Gemara will compare that to other situations in which you give property to someone not for the purpose of him keeping it, but for the purpose of a transference to someone else. So let's begin. We've already seen the Mishnah. The Mishnah had been discussing situations in which you have public property and therefore everyone's considered to have a share in it. If one of the people is also to have on another person who has a share in it, can he use it? So we've seen if it's belonging to if it's exclusive to the people of the city, then it's a problem. The Mishnah had given a few examples, and the Mishnah had said, what could you do? Transfer to the Nasi. Now, the language of the Mishnah wasn't clear. The language of the Mishnah seemed to say that you give it over if the one who has the Isser Hana from his property were to give that over to the Nasi, that would create a problem. The Gemara asks, what's the problem? The Gemara explains, no, what we mean to say is that's the solution. The solution is transfer the possession of one's share to the Nasi of the town, and that way you'll be able to have Hana from it, because it doesn't belong to the one who has the Yisr Hana anymore. Now, the Gemara here repeats a big chunk of the Mishnah that we're trying to explain. It's mistakenly reprinted here. It should be taken out. And then the Gemara explains the last part where it had machlokes between Rav Yehuda and the Tanna Kamma about who you can transfer it to. Is it only the people of, is it only the Nasi or even to anybody? And Rav Yehuda had commented that the people of the Galil already had their property transferred to the Nasi because their fathers transferred it. So the Gemara explains that a little further by bringing a brisa where Yehuda says that people of the Galil used to fight a lot, and therefore their fathers transferred all their property to the Nasi because they were often making Nedarim and answering things on each other and creating problems. And now we get to our next Mishnah, which is the story, the famous incident which has been quoted a number of times already in the Masechta, the story of Matnas Beis Choron. So the Mishnah begins and it says that somebody who has an Isser Hana is not allowed to have enough from someone else, but the person who is also to have enough doesn't have anything to eat, and the other one wants to give him food, so he has to give it to someone else, and then that one can transfer it. Now, the Gemara inserts a line here. The Gemara says, but if it is clear, based on what happens at the end, that it was a hoax, and he only transferred it to someone else in order that he should be able to give it to the one who has the Yisr Hana, and it was not a real transfer in any other sense of the word, then it's no good. And in order to demonstrate this point, the Gemara brings the story of Beis Choron. The Gemara says it was somebody in Beis Choron who had an Yisr Hana on his father. His father was not allowed to have Hana from him. However, his son was making a wedding. He's marrying off his son. He wanted to invite his father to the wedding. He wanted him to be able to enjoy it. So he said to a third person, I'm going to give my entire courtyard and the Suda, the wedding feast that's made in it, to you. It all belongs to you. And I'm giving it to you in order that my father should be able to enjoy it. So the other guy said, okay, I'm taking it, and I'm being makdish it, hektish l'shamayim. So the guy said, what do you mean? I didn't give it to you to be makdish it to shamayim. I gave it to you that my father should be able to enjoy it. He said, you gave it to me in order that you and your father could sit together and have a feast, even though you have an Isser Hana, and the Avera should be on my head. Because you wanted me to be the fall guy for this. I'm not interested in being the fall guy, and therefore I'm being makdish to shamayim. Now, that obviously was a problem, and therefore the Chachamim set the following rule. Any gift which cannot be hektish cannot be used to transfer property and avoid an Isser Hana. So if you don't give it completely enough that person who's receiving it can go ahead and be makdish it, and that's not a problem, then it also is not effective to go give it to a third party who is also to have enough from you. Now, the Gemara explains that you have to insert the phrase there, and then the Gemara brings two versions of what Rava says as to how the person phrased the gift precisely. If he said, I'm only giving it to you in order to give it to my father, then it's definitely a problem, because then it's certainly eminently clear that this is a hoax and he's not really giving it to him, and he does not allow him to do anything with it. What if he said, I'm giving it to you in order that my father should be able to? And he didn't say it's only because. He said, I'm giving it to you, and I want my father to be able to enjoy it. What's the halacha there? So in the first version of Rava, that's okay, because he didn't say I'm not giving it to you otherwise. He just said I'm giving it to you, and the gift is complete. And the reason that I want to give it to you is because I want my father to enjoy it, but it's not exclusive, or it's not conditioned on that. Going to the second version of Rava, it's usher. And even though The reason is because even though he didn't say so explicitly, the fact that he gave his entire wedding feast away shows that it's not a real thing. No one makes a wedding and gives it away to someone else and never leaves it for himself. Obviously, he's only doing it because he's restricting the gift just as a hoax that his father should be able to enjoy it, and therefore it does not count. It doesn't work at all. Now the Gemara brings another case, and the Gemara is going to want to bring a proof to a question in that case from this Mishnah. So the case over there is there was a fellow who had a son who used to steal flax from people. He wasn't happy with his actions, so he said, I'm mastering Hana, my son can't have enough from me, which means he wouldn't be able to inherit. He would inherit, but he wouldn't be able to use the inheritance. So the people said to him, how do you know, why are you asking your son from having inheritance? What if he has a son? What if you have a grandson who's a Talmid Chacham? Don't you want your property to go to him? So he said, yes, I do. In fact, I'm going to give half my property to my son, the bad guy. So apparently he had two sons. One was a tzaddik and one was this Rasha. So he said, you know what? I'm going to give half my property to my son, the tzaddik. The other half I'm going to give to my son, the Rasha, on the condition that his son is a tzaddik and a Talmid Chacham, and that it'll transfer from him to the grandson who's a Talmid Chacham. If there is no grandson who's a Talmid Chacham, then the condition is voided, the gift is voided, and it all goes to my other son who's a tzaddik himself. However, there is no circumstance in which it goes to the son who's a Rasha. Either he doesn't get it at all because he doesn't have a son who's a tzaddik, or he gets it only to be able to transfer it further. So the first question is, does this work or not? So the Gemara says that in Pumbedisa they said it does not work because he's not giving it to the son that he can take possession of it. He's giving it to the son only that the son can pass it further. You cannot give something to someone and stipulate that he doesn't get it. If you're giving it to him, it's his and he can do what he wants with it. If you're not letting him have any piece of it, it never belongs to him. And if it never belongs to him, he can't pass it further. Now, Rav Nachman disagrees. And Rav Nachman says you can give something to someone only for the sake of transferring property. And he compares it to a different case. He compares it to a kinyan chalipin that's performed with a handkerchief. The halacha is that when Reuven gives something to Shimon, he can make that changing of possession from Reuven to Shimon also transfers something in exchange from Shimon to Reuven. Now, it could be a real trade, like Reuven gives Shimon his cow, and Shimon gives Reuven his donkey, and when you change possession of the cow, that automatically changes possession of the donkey, even though it's not here. It could also be symbolic. Reuven could give Shimon his handkerchief, and Shimon takes possession of the handkerchief. That transfers ownership of the donkey, which is not here. And then he gives the handkerchief back because it doesn't need it. He only gave it to him in order to effect the transfer of some other object. Now, if that's the case, so when Reuven's giving a handkerchief to Shimon, he's not giving it to him to keep the handkerchief. He's giving it to him so that a different kinyan could take place. So that's just like our case, where the father is giving property to the son in order that it go to the grandson. That's slightly different because here he's giving it to him so that he should pass it along further. In the case of Reuven giving the handkerchief to Shimon, he's giving to him that he should give it back to him. But either way, he's not giving it to him to keep. He's giving it to him to affect some other kinyan, and yet it works in the case of Sudar, so it should work here as well. So the Gemara says Rav Ashi had two kashas on this. Rav Ashi says, first of all, it's very different because in the case of the handkerchief, Shimon could decide to keep the handkerchief. If he wants to, he could. Now, he doesn't have to give it back. Generally, he gives it back because there's no interest in the handkerchief. He has an interest in transferring ownership of the donkey, which isn't here. But who says he can't? And therefore, it's not the same thing as here, where the son is not allowed to take possession of the property. It has to transfer to the grandson. So you cannot prove from here that when you take possession of something and you're not allowed to use it, you just have to pass it on, then that works at all. The second question is that the transfer of possession by the handkerchief takes place immediately. And Reuven gives the handkerchief to Shimon. The donkey transfers from Shimon's rishus to Reuven's rishus. However, over here, nothing's happening now to transfer from the son to the grandson. The father's giving it to the son, and he's ordering him to give it to the grandson when the grandson's around. He's not even born yet, possibly. And at the time that this grandson is born, the father is already long dead. So there is this kinyan, the kinyan from the father to the son, is no longer existing to transfer to the grandson. It's got to go first to possession of the son before it can be transferred to the grandson. And therefore, such a thing doesn't work at all. The Gemara now says, Rava asked the kasha on Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says this transfer from the father to the son works, even though the son's not allowed to keep it. But how come in our Mishnah, the transfer to the third party in order that the father should be able to keep it, that did not work? We said that it's not a valid transfer because he only gave it to the third guy in order that the father should be able to take it from him. So you see, a transfer where the middle party is not meant to keep it does not work. So the Gemara gives two answers. The Gemara says Rav Nachman had different versions of how he answered it. One version that he answered was, over there it's different. It's clearly a hoax because he's giving away an entire wedding feast, so it's obviously not meant to work at all. It's the screaming hoax from a mile away. Here, though, even though he said explicitly, I don't want you to have it, but it's not a screaming hoax, so therefore the kinyan in and of itself was a valid kinyan, as opposed to there where it was a totally messed up kinyan. The second answer that he gave was that it could be that the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that Nedarim are worse than actual Hilchos Kinyanim. So, for example, in Nedarim, even something which a person is generally meichel to his friend, you can't take if you have an Isser Hana. So, as we've seen in the Mishnah, if a person would generally allow somebody to use his property, so even in a sense where people could take payment for it, but he generally allows it, so we assume in Hilchos Kinyanim and Choshen Mishpat that that's okay. But in Hilchos Nedarim, you can't do that. You're not allowed to have that Hana. So Nedarim is worse than regular Hilchos Kinyanim. So here as well, it could be that in the case of Nedarim, where you're trying to avoid Nedarim, there it doesn't work because Nedarim are worse. But in our case here, where there's no Nedarim involved, there's just somebody who's trying to transfer property to a grandson to using the son. It's just a question of Kinyanim. It could be that would work. Gemara now has one more kasha, and this takes us to the end of the fifth parak in the Masechta. And this kasha is from the Mishnah, where it said the rule at the end. It said the only type of gift that works is all gifts, in order for them to work, have to be a gift that it can be maktir. So what are we including by saying all gifts? In order for the gift to be able to work, have to be able to be maktir. What are we referring to there? Wouldn't that logically likely be including our case? And therefore it's teaching that in our case, the transfer does not work because the middle person is not allowed to acquire it in any sense. So the Gemara says, no, that's not necessarily what it's referring to. It could be referring to the case which we said, according to our second version of Rava before, that if he's not explicitly told you're not allowed to keep it, I'm just giving it to you in order that someone else should be able to take it. If he didn't say that, he just said, here, I'm giving it to you, and I want someone else to be able to acquire it as well, that is included as well. That's also no good because the Suda is proving that he was not serious about it.